it's just when you're a functioning human being, you take for granted how and why some other people are not functioning in what would seem a rational way or would seem obvious to you or in a way that you just. It's not even about like somebody. I was like, oh, my mother's stubborn. You know, I get that about her now. I'm like, no, your mother's just stubborn, which means she understands something and she chooses to reject that. Somebody who's been traumatized and grown into that sphere and only knows one way of living, they're not stubborn. They don't actually have two sides to anything. They only have what they know as being truth and reality, and they're in the world.
When it comes into critical thinking like that, 99% of people don't look at it like that. They don't like anytime there's a guy in our neighborhood who always yells at my wife and I because we walk my dog's 20 pounds.
Okay.
I have a 20-pound doodle and we walk him off leash. He's never on a leash. So there's a guy who's got a big black dog that always yells at us. Get your dog on a fucking leash. Like this guy once, we were walking by him. He said, get your dog on a leash or I'm going to kick him. And like my wife's reaction was like, fuck you. Like, what do you mean? But I'm like, dude, are you okay?
Yeah, obviously he's got a problem.
Like it's like this isn't the problem.
No, he's got a problem before he shows up to that.
Like there's something going on.
This is just a trigger.
Yes.
Of whatever's behind that.
And I explained to my wife, like, you got to realize, this guy is not like he might dislike that we have an off leash dog, but there's something going on in his life.
Yeah, you're better off being like, hey man, we every time, like, do you want to talk about this?
Exactly.
Or like,
and I'm
what's going on? Like, you seem to care really a lot about this.
There's
like, what
other
do you
things going on that like have brought him to the point.
Let's put the dogs aside. Let's go have coffee. Like, there's just, you have to like create some. If their trigger response is just aggressivity, to be aggressive, to be angry, to be angry, to be whatever. Clearly, behind that is vulnerability and fear and insecurity. Is some environment where in a past life that no longer exists, but they're still living in, that use case is triggering to them.
With a lot of people, it also goes back to not even just a past life and now. Who knows what happened that morning?
That morning. Yeah, I mean, everybody's accruing things all day long. So,
but like that guy, who knows, might have a mother in hospice that he goes to see.
He's stressed out.
He goes to see at 6:30 every morning. He has to drive to Staten Island to see her in hospice, come
his
back to
bucket's
Brooklyn.
already this full, and you're just a tipping point. Absolutely.
Like, who knows? Probably not the case because he lives I found out where he lives. He lives in a beautiful condo building where fucking studios rent for $6,500 a month. And
but by the way, it's one of the reasons why I never engage in aggressive environments. And it's not that I avoid them as much as because I grew up in the projects and there is nothing that comes from, amplifying aggression. Nothing. Like, there is nothing in your response that benefits you. There's nothing in the safety of it that benefits you. There's nothing in the outcome that benefits you. And there's nothing that makes it more controlling that benefits. Like, you lose more control in outcomes when aggressivity spikes up. And so aggressivity against aggressivity just ensures that there's way more chaos and uncertainty to any outcome. So when I grew up in the projects, and I was skinny and frail and scared all the time, it was always like, can I give these guys a reason to see me as so irrelevant, so useless, so belittling to their own time, space, and spectrum of identity that they don't even want to. I'm not even worth them mugging me. I'm not even worth them beating me up. And that was one of my number one tools to functioning for 5-6 years in an environment where I was a minority, where baseball bats and razor blades and was like I'd show up home without my shoes on, like. That was just the default, or people getting killed in the subway or in buses. Like, that was the default environment. So the one thing that I learned is anything that allows these guys to validate their position of anger, their position of perceived strength and ego or need to project onto others whatever it is that their rage is about, just gives them a reason to do that. And so for me, it was like when I was in public school and there were, gangs, and I was always like, okay, I have no chance in any of this. There's no realm where me getting involved in anything gets me anything except for downside.
And you grew up in Bronx?
No, outside in the projects of Paris.
This sounds like the Bronx.
Yeah, I mean, the projects in Paris and around Paris are very segregated.
How impoverished was it?
Lower income, same, government housing, projects, minorities, immigrants. lower income to poverty.
What's the neighborhood look like now?
There's actually a lot more of those neighborhoods than there used to be when I grew up. Because with more immigration and less inclusion, and more immigration driving to people having more kids in lower income environments, and with the subsidy of the French social welfare system, then you're just cultivating that. So those neighborhoods have actually grown significantly.
So people then end up having another kid because they'll get more money.
Yeah, in the French system, yeah. And it's not a racial thing. It's every white, black, Algerians, Arabs, like it doesn't matter. Like it's just a fundamental premise which is like, well, there's no inclusion. We're being put in these areas, and then there's subsidies. So, I mean, you kind of just are cultivating that environment in itself. Where here, I mean, like the subsidies are, very minimal. I mean, my sister, who's normal white woman, who could have had many opportunities to be anything else but on welfare, and she's been living on welfare and government checks around subsidies for transportation, housing, and getting actual income from having kids, and living on $2,000 or $3,000 a month. Hasn't worked in 25 years.
Jesus.
So they smoke weed, and they come up with reasons to why there's conspiracy theories and self-promoting neurotic Facebook stuff,
Yeah.
Because you have nothing, because you're not actually, you don't have self-worth. I mean,
not only that, you're also in a community, and that the big thing there is community.
Yeah.
Because now you're in a community where your neighbor's doing it, and you're doing it.
There's no rationality to do anything else.
We're in New York, so it's like your upstairs neighbor's doing it, your down the hall neighbor's doing it.
Yeah, I mean, these are 20-story buildings, whatever. You're an outcast, and in that, it's like, you don't become 200 pounds overweight overnight. And you don't become mentally impoverished overnight either.
200 pounds overweight.
I'm just saying fundamentally. Like people who get to that, they've been eating chips gradually every day for the past 15 years.
In their fucking sleep.
Yeah, but by the time you realize that you wish you had done something, you no longer have the moral compass or the courage or the discipline or the surroundings or the people around you to actually make any of that real.
Well, what do you think about how, we'll say, social media and just the country as a whole just makes it okay for people to feel like you're fine. You're fine gaining all that weight.
I see in startup world. Forget about the rest. I mean, I see environments where everybody has like everything to gain, and people are being pacified and justified and validated for just bumping into their daily struggles, as if like you're fine. You're fine for doing nothing about that, or you're fine the way you are. You're fine, and I'll see it often, even in incubators, where it's like, you're going to get the product wrong at first, or you're going to have to pivot, or you're going to fail many times. Yeah, okay, yeah, sure. I mean, you don't know what it's really like to parent, and you're going to have to make mistakes. Yeah, okay. Is that really helpful? Like, does that actually accomplish or help you do anything else but to just know that it's okay for you to have made a few mistakes along the way?
No.
And so there's fundamentally, I think, an issue around people's interest in learning, and thus what it is we're feeding people.
Or people's lack of interest in learning.
Yeah.
A big part of it is that more people have a lack of interest.
Yes.
And I was talking about this with my therapist because I assume that all parents are teaching their kids how to enunciate words. I assume that all parents every night are taking out books and holding them up and saying, hamburger, shark. And I assume that all parents do that. But apparently, most don't.
No.
His teacher yesterday told me that, that's advanced.
Yeah.
Advanced.
And which is at the heart of a lot of the American social issue at this point in our time, which is parents don't parent because it's work. And they're doing so much work to make money to buy things that have no intrinsic value to parenting that they no longer have the desire or the motivation or the intent or the connectivity to their children to be present and to do the work in a way that's validating to themselves and the child. So the more you're spending time on things that actually have lower value but you over-index on, and thus remove yourself from the natural, the natural connection of your child and, skin to skin or laughing or seeing and participating or presence around that, well, the more you're going to start over-indexing on the stuff that you have rationalized are more valuable because now you no longer really are sensitized to that. You don't really see the value, and that becomes work in itself. And then you have to do work, the reconnecting, plus doing the work of them, of you parenting. But now you're like, well, if I just buy him a pair of Nike shoes or a console or a PlayStation or pay for a birthday, like that makes it all okay.
Yeah, well, I guess I haven't experienced that within his because we're still at 20 months.
Yeah,
so
but
like you probably see that a lot, especially living in Manhattan. You probably see that from his friends. Like,
yeah, I've seen it. I've been seeing it for decades. But it's equate to the, how did you end up 200 pounds overweight? The little things every day that we choose not to do because they're uncomfortable become our daily lives, and that becomes the foundation of what our futures are. Fundamentally, like what you choose to do now sets yourself up for tomorrow. You're not creating 10 years ahead. You're creating what you think is possible for 10 years ahead or 2 years ahead or 3 years ahead and what you envision, and that's what you're willing to do for that now, right? Because you're not living in the past that solves nothing or does nothing for you. But if you're not intentional in the now to what you want tomorrow to be, then tomorrow never actually happens. Like it doesn't actually become reality. So all the little things that we choose to find excuses not to do the things that we'll over-index on because they've become easier for us and more convenient, will end up being the foundation for every day.
So when companies bring you in, to piggyback on this, when companies bring you in, are there usually similarities between things that they're lacking from company A to B to C? Like are people comfortable not doing certain things that you're seeing universally?
I think in their own, a seed stage has to accomplish certain things, and somebody's going to come to the table with certain levels of skills and maturity or attributes. At Series A, Series B, in that machine, in that engine of that window of time in that stage is similar. It doesn't mean it's the same issues as much as there's patterns around these issues. Or there's patterns around why they've hit a wall or a ceiling, or whether, and accordingly, why the company's not growing as fast, or why they're not solving as many problems, or why the culture's going down the shit, or, why the founders are having problems, or, and so what the founder has to be able to do at pre-seed to seed, he has to be better at it and what it really means. We're solving problems, prioritizing problems, valuing problems, hiring, fundraising, like those things never stop. So like you actually have to keep on getting better at things that you had shortcomings to start out with on. And sometimes you over-index on those in a good way, and sometimes you don't, which means you'll have shortcomings somewhere else, which means that if you don't address those or you don't have a co-founder who helps in that, they will follow you along the way because you'll always be, disproportionate of like, we've done this very well and then we don't do this very well. Over time, that implies that there's going to be, some, fragility at the bottom of the foundation.
So a big
Are
part.
we recording?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't realize.
Yeah. So a big part of this is also delegating.
Yeah, I say fundamentally, and more I've come to subconsciously do it and then consciously want to do it, which is like, what you know. And I was just on a call with a founder today who's a first-timer. And it's really interesting to hear people try to self-validate what they think they know and what that makes them right in their choices and their action.
And is this something that is this a tone of voice that you generally hear from a first-time founder?
Almost any founder. It's just something that we get comfortable with within ourselves, because this is where our foundation of truth and belief and confidence comes from, is that you know what you know, and you believe that hardly, and you believe that concretely, and you have trust in that.
But are you saying more so in the sense of like they don't have the full truth and they're trying to manifest?
Well, the problem is that they know what they know, which intrinsically allows them to do certain things and give them great limitations for everything they haven't figured out they don't know that they need to know. So there's what you know, there's what you don't know you need to, you don't know, and then there's what you don't know you need to know. And those
say that 3 times fast.
Yeah. And so what's important is like, okay, what do I know, and how is that valuable, or how is that limiting, right? And then there's what you don't know but you realize you need to know, right? So like something like, hey, I'm going to live in China. Well, I don't know Chinese and I should learn Chinese. Right? And then there's everything you don't know, but you should figure out somehow outside of the spectrum of that. So there's your inner circle of reality, of truth, of knowing, and you tend to make truth and belief around that. Then around that is a circle of all the things that you don't know, and you can choose to learn for certain reasons and certain purposes. And then beyond that is everything you don't know. So how much more is there out there for you? Beyond what you think you know, which is really, really limited. But we're so anchored in that. But if you think about parenting, if you think about a startup, if you think, let's say you're going to go climb Everest tomorrow, but think about parenting. How much do you know? You know nothing. I mean, I already know the answer to that because people have kids, they know nothing. And we're not taught anything. And there's very limited real way of learning it without putting yourself in the context of having one, a child, and then choosing to engage in the process of growing with that child. It's not just learning, it's like growing, right? In an environment where you either choose to be intentional in the process of, the words and reading and writing and playfulness and discovery and imagination, and that engine that that you're really fueling, which is their operating system, their foundational
it's also kind of like a startup where you're kind of beta testing different concepts.
That's what I'm saying. The fundamentals of how life expands and how we expand isn't different in any circumstance. In fact, and so what is the shortcoming of parenting? Well, that you don't want to learn what you don't know you need to know and what you don't know you don't know. And if you just stick to what you know, then what have you done? A lower, lesser version of yourself. A mini-me that on your best day, you're a 5 as a human. So that probably is going to make a 4 as a kid.
Oh, God.
But how is society functioning? Many versions of their parents. Because there's no real aspiration by the parent to function outside their realm of like, well, this is my life. So my life is I go to my job. My life is I got to make money. My life is I'm burdened. My life is I have a lot of, obligations. My life is, that's your life. Right? And how's that working for you?
Yeah, and especially in New York where there's a lot of noise.
But it's at all levels. You go to middle class, you go to upper, everybody's on their own treadmill. A $50,000 treadmill a year, $1 million treadmill a year, it's the same misery. Right? It's just one's got more expenses to it, and they're making more money to pay for these expenses. Doesn't make them better parents. Doesn't make them more self-aware. It just means in the machine of the economical system that we're in, they either have better education, a better system in place, or they've developed better skills that sells greater value. Yeah, when I spent time with my kids, I'm always like, education is important, but most important, if you ultimately want to make money, which you can choose for yourself, you have to solve problems of high value. That's it. Like, you can look at things however you want to look at things, and you can convince yourself of whatever you want. But what you're getting paid for is the value of what you're solving for. And if the value of that is easily replicable or easily repeated, or you're just repeating it on a daily basis, like an accountant, yes, there's what the market bears. And in some contexts of companies, they'll pay, give or take, more or less. If you're in Minnesota, $50,000 a year. If you're in New York City, $100,000 a year. Okay, but that's the perceived value of you being an accountant, the skills that you had to develop for that, and what you're solving for that company on a daily basis. That's it. That's what you're worth to that company. That's what you're worth to the market. If you start solving significantly greater problems of greater value that create greater outputs.
Like yourself?
Yeah, like I have in startups or in however you build companies or for my clients, then the market rewards you more. It's just that fundamentally simple. So as you go into education, as you go into a lot of things, like there has to be from the parents, from the environment, from the individual, a desire to acknowledge that you cannot be more than what it is that you choose to learn and create in value. Like you can be a good person, you can be a lot of things. But I'm just saying in the economical construct of our society, which is a capitalistic environment, what your output of value is directly tied to the value of what you're solving for.
Amen.
Right? And so that doesn't make you a better person than anybody else. It's just the context of how money gets generated, and how the market rewards that. And then you get really good at that, and then that could become significant, right? And whether it's in a startup or as a financier or as a lawyer, it doesn't mean you have to be it's like a loose career. It just means like, you can be a lawyer and be extremely talented at solving really complex legal problems in complex industries where somebody's going to reward you a lot for that, right? So it's not necessarily about the profession. It's about how you're applying that skill set into an environment that creates greater value. And if that environment is limited to the skill itself and that skill being applied every day in the same way, which is what a lot of jobs are, you're limited expansion, limited value creation.
Right. And a big part of that is parenting, mentorship. Yeah.
I mean, you have to want more for your kid than you are yourself. And I don't mean in what you own or have. I mean in who you are. And I don't think a lot of people look at things through that lens. They look at it as like, well, I want my kids to be better off. What does that mean? Like a bigger house or a bigger job? And I get it that if you're lower income or poorer, like that there's a lot of rationality in that because the friction of not having enough money is significant in this country. And obviously, statistically, whether it's emotionally or economically or lifestyle-wise, like you are better off with having a certain amount of income, which is somewhere between $90,000 to $120,000, give or take. But who you are is significantly more valuable to your environment than what you have, right? Beyond the basics. And I care a lot more about who my kids become based on what their perception of reality and who they are, who they can be, what it's going to take, how to get there, and their willingness to participate in that experience is going to be for them. And so again, their mom indexed fairly heavily on education and grades, and I think that's important because there's a system in place and you can't avoid it. And you do learn a lot of things around working through the system. My primary area.
Well, how old's your oldest?
He's turning 12 and the youngest is 5.
So what are they doing in math at 12 years old?
Various kinds of formulaic, algebra, multiplication, divisions.
Okay. Is it stuff that's like actually gonna have any like when you look at stuff like that, like teaching a kid algebra, when they could be learning teach a 12-year-old accounting.
Yeah, I think yes and no. I think knowing how to add, knowing multiply, division.
Is that algebra?
Yeah.
Oh, what am I thinking? Because I guess I'm thinking more like advanced algebra.
Yeah, I mean,
it gets
calculus and all these other.
I had a TI-83 in my hand yesterday.
Yeah.
And it was a TI-83 or a TI, whatever it was. It was one of the Texas Instruments. And there's like the option. There's the button on the top left that says second, which you then could have the button and then second use the other everything.
Yeah.
Like, what are all these? I don't know. I didn't know one of these buttons meant.
No, yeah, I've had one of those calculators on the Wall Street days, whatever. I never figured out how to use it. It was too complicated for me. I think that because when you're young, learning is so much easier. Languages, reading, writing, My 5-year-old's always like, how come I don't know this yet? I'm like, because you got to learn it. How come I'm not doing this or doing that? And I love that about him. He's always like, why am I not here yet? And I'm like, oh, this is why you're going to school right now. Or he's like, why can't I read? I'm like, well, we'll be somewhere. And I'm like, forget sometimes that he's not fully reading yet. He's doing the letters. And he's writing the letters and knows how to spell but he's not reading. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, we're not there yet. And he's like, why am I not there yet? I'm like, well, you have to learn that. You're gonna have to learn how to read. It's like, okay, when am I doing that? And the reason is because he sees his brother doing a lot of things and participating and reading all these books. My son has a trait that I didn't have when I was young. He's a big reader, and so I happen to know a lot of people. The only thing I gift my son, birthdays and Christmas, are dedicated books, autographed books with dedicated messages. I don't actually buy my kids presents. And so experiences, that they get a lot of in Christmas, outside of Christmas, but the presents don't come from me in the house.
I love that.
And because you're going to get them, first of all.
We're very much one and the same in that. I wish that they had like kids books, right, where they took like classic self-development books, like let's say Think and Grow Rich, but they made it a 28-page children's book.
They actually have a lot of those. And my son, they have a lot of autobiographies and history.
Well, the autobiographies, yes.
And the history and autobiographies and some other, more, accounting for dummies, like versions for kids. There's a lot of that out there. My son's been reading, Limitless from Colin Brady or, 14 Peaks, Nim's Eye and David Goggins' book already and Michael Jordan's book and Kobe's book. Like, he's been reading those. He was reading Forbes at 6.
Your son read Can't Hurt Me?
Yeah.
That's so good.
He was a little overwhelmed.
Yeah. Eye-opening.
He was overwhelmed with language.
Okay.
Yeah, we're pretty... he's a kind of really empathetic, sweet, genuine kid.
I imagine a 12-year-old reading Goggins might have a nightmare that night.
It took him a little time. He was a little overwhelmed. And so in relation to something like 14 Peaks and, and the Impossible Journey of Colin Brady, those he processed pretty well. Even Kobe and other he's read probably 24 autobiographies in the smaller book sizes of Steve Jobs and athletes, and he just consumes those.
Like the what are they called? Little Thinkers.
Yeah. He's consumed 24 of those in a year's time. He's reading 2-3 books a month.
I love that.
Yeah, and I'm like, these things are like this. I mean, I can't. I'm like, and I love seeing it. I don't push it on him, you know. I will certainly push that over screen time, but I don't require him. But if somebody gave him a book, I'm like, you're gonna have to read that book. If we go to practice, you're gonna have to practice. If I'm paying for summer camp, you're gonna be active in it. Like if I'm showing up, for a swim class and we're paying for that, like you're gonna swim. Now he can choose to say, well, you know what, like I just spent 4 years swimming and I love to try basketball, or I want to, and I'm like, great, I'll find you a great camp, and you can go do that. And I will show up and I will drop him off every camp and pick him up every camp, and I will glance from the side of the window. I'm not a parent who screams on the sideline or who tells coaches how to coach or kids how to coach them while they're playing
keep it up
game.
here.
It's not. I mean, no kid wants that.
Yeah.
Like that's just a ridiculous human behavior of a parent. Like
it's
different to like.
It's unfortunate, but it's comical, but it's unfortunate.
The problem is it's parents projecting on their kids who their kids should be based on human adult processing, who are on the sideline of life in that moment, telling somebody else how to behave who they are not. Like they're on a emotional growth, learning, like nothing comes of that. Like your kid, for the most part, like it's one thing to cheer.
If anything, negative.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like it's one thing to cheer your kid, and I actually don't even do that on the sideline because I want my kid to have his experience. I don't want him to, turn the head and look all the time. My son, got used to me being on the sideline and having an OPEC face, which he processed that, either I'm not doing well or I'm doing well, and he had to learn to figure that out for himself. But ultimately, like, he stopped looking at some point. But when my son finishes swim, my oldest and my youngest, I go, how do you do? I don't tell him how they did. I ask him how they did. And he will say, hey, it wasn't a great, I didn't do great today. I was like, oh, what do you think that is? And I engage with them in the process of them owning and rationalizing and understanding their own behaviors and their choices. And when my son's like, I was like, I was like, I'll be like, oh, you came in fourth today. And he's like, yeah. And I'll be like, well, it's breaststroke is not my favorite. I'm like, okay. I mean, that's how everything is going to work when something is not what your favorite, then you're not going to choose to perform or go all out. Like, and then we'll have a conversation about why that doesn't work in life, right? And
how's the younger son taking to swimming?
He struggled, and I think that's again part of the parenting. Like, we did one way with my oldest, and then my youngest had COVID in his era of like 1 to 3 years old, so we didn't have all the social activities and all the camps, so it was harder to get certain things like swimming into the mix. So he started later, and he was, for one reason or another, always more afraid and slightly. He was more afraid. He just didn't have confidence in the water, and 3 or 4 kids in the pool and with the teacher, and now you're only swimming out of 40 minutes, really 10 minutes total, as an individual child, and they're all at different levels and everybody's behaving differently, and I want to drown a few, and you're like, whose kid is this? Who's parenting this guy? And we have a saying when we go to practice or we go to school, it's like, okay, what are we doing today? Because they have to be self-aware of the intention of why they're here. Okay, we listen to the teacher, listen to the coach, learn some skills, have fun, and win. Right? And if it's school, it's like listen to the teacher, learn something, eat all your lunch, have fun. Like there's just an intention to the learning process, and the brain will kind of migrate towards that. You're intentionally telling yourself and reminding yourself and positioning yourself into an environment of progression, learning, focus. So you don't have to be 40 years old or 30 years old to wait to do that when you wake up in the morning. Like you can learn how to do that at a young age. You can learn anything at a young age. This isn't me traumatizing my kids and forcing something on my kids. It's me engaging my kids and them being able to start choosing how their experiences go, how they're reacting to their experiences, how they're intentional and non-intentional, and what they can choose to value or what they can choose to focus on or what can matter to them or not. And it's just more about creating the environment for the tools and for them to see the tools apply themselves and for them to see the value of that in the actual doing and the reward of that doing. And so Alistair, my oldest, is quite a great swimmer. He's at Asphalt Green, second best on his team, and they're just fantastic. Girl who's probably like, 10 inches taller than him because he's a small kid. And she's just better than him. she's stronger, she's more physical, she's slightly more technical. The combination in the pool at that age is significant. And they're not always that far off, but, he's a clear number 2, she's a clear number 1. Every now and then she has a slow day and he ties her or he beats her by very little. And that makes his day, and I love it because she actually sees him at competition. There's the girl-boy thing because now they're, tweens. There's respect there. And I made sure that my son saw her that way. Like, why would you want to hang out with the other boys who are lesser than you are in skills and strength just to hang out with the guys when you can focus on her and, practice and train with her in the same lane as her and compete with her? And there's a bit of social construct around that. She's a girl, they're boys, like they're tweens, there's all these dynamics. But for me, I was like, I always, I cheer her on because she's great. But my son from that has learned to want to compete because he does like to win.
Well, he's also a guy you as a father.
Yeah. I mean, in the environment that we create with their mom, of course, that has significance in, Dad's back on a plane to do a 3-day speed climb of Denali, or Dad's back on the plane to spend 48 hours in, somewhere in Latin America. And they see the work, Dad's back in the stairs with 50 pounds for 2 hours. Like, they see that work ethic. Yeah. They see the commitment to the process. And I walk him through the process. I walk him through where I get the information, who I'm training with, who's advising me, where I'm going to do the training, the skill development, what it's going to take, what the risks are. And so he doesn't just see a result. I have my kids 4 days a week, 3 to 4 days a week on my own, right? It's because we're separated parents. We're very close. We live across the hall from each other, and we co-parent, cohabitate for a long period of time. Fantastic mother, fantastic relationship. I'm really blessed for that. Enormous amounts of work. But so they see me. We are always together. I never had my first nanny or babysitter until Alistair was 11.
Jesus.
10 and a half, I think. Last year was my first time ever having one.
A babysitter?
Yeah, like a one-off.
You mean like a...
Night.
Wait, what?
No, never. No. It's, I have the kids, I have the kids.
Uh-huh.
She has the kids, she has the kids. That's my window of time. An enormous amount of discipline around the structure and the commitment to the household and the kids. Now, again, like, parents should have date nights, right? Parents should have personal times. Obviously, if you're co-parenting, cohabitating, or whatever that may be, like, that will come more naturally in itself. But at the same time, when it's my night, it's my night.
Yeah, I guess I don't know much yet because my kid's not even 2 yet. So for me to want to, let's say, go to a Knicks game starts at 7:30. My kid's asleep by 7:15.
Yeah.
So like, hey, what's the difference if we get a babysitter to come at 6:30? Yeah. Literally, he's already ready to go to bed. Boom, he's sleeping while she's there. So you're not like missing any time.
Again, I think when the two parents are together, it's a little bit of dynamics of like, okay, who's carrying what burden or committing to what in a given moment in time? Who's getting their personal time? Who's getting, where's the couple time, and where's the individual time or the family time? It's not that different once you're co-parenting, but I always looked at it as like ultimately a slippery slope. Everything is a slippery slope. Everything is a step towards a lesser version of erosion over time. And it's not right or wrong. That's just my perspective of experience of life.
Yeah, while your perspective is as a line, like my wife's head would explode if she heard everything coming out of your mouth for the last 15 minutes. Because she's like, how did you find this guy who literally thinks like you do? But it's kind of like I busted up my finger last week.
Right.
I got into the gym today for the first time since like last Tuesday. I was there for 5 minutes and busted my finger.
Yeah,
today was the first time in over a week that I've been at the gym.
Yeah.
And it was great. Now, I'm not going to, I didn't allow something to fester and keep me out of the gym for longer. No, I got into the gym, right. And if I'm grabbing weights, I'm not using my pointer finger, and I'm getting back in there where other people might.
Yeah. So the question I have for you is, did you work out the other 5 days?
No,
I would have.
Yeah, I didn't. I had my excuse, and I had excuses.
Yeah.
If I have because my gym time, my schedule is I take my kid to daycare,
Yep.
and then I'm at the gym by like 8:45, and I'm there for like 2 hours.
Yeah.
If I have after the finger injury, which was on Tuesday, like the rest of the week, the next 3 days, I had like a 9:30 meeting, a 10 o'clock meeting, and a 10 o'clock meeting, where I am now not giving myself enough time to drop him at daycare, go work out, shower, and get to said meeting.
Yeah.
So now I'm just giving myself the excuse that, all right, your finger is giving you time off, rest is good, when I probably also could have gone middle of the day, end of the day.
Elliptical after the kid goes to bed, or things that are less entertaining, exciting, fun, comfortable, convenient for you. And going to some of the thoughts, and things that you want to talk about around, well, how do you, like, what are some of the habits that people can develop?
Yeah, let's tee up some specific questions.
Yeah, because that leads to that, for example.
All right. So high achievers often have disciplined routines and habits that support sustain their performance. Can you describe the daily or weekly habits that you believe are most critical for maintaining your mental sharpness and resilience?
Yeah. So first, it's really to accept context of where you are to start with, right? Nobody becomes Goggins overnight. You have to gradually work your way to a certain level of anything. So I think where I'm at now, right, after decades of working on myself and applying myself to these things and tweaking them to me, because we're all slightly different, right, with certain skill sets or certain comfort zones or, predetermined kind of, habits, wherever those things may be. But ultimately, I think there's just an aggregate of habits and skills and discipline and behaviors that almost every high achiever has. One is you practice gratitude, right? That's just fundamental. It's brain chemical, it's context, it's healthy, it's better than ego.
What are a couple ways that could look like?
There's different ways of stimulating that. Like, you have a child. You look at a picture of your kid. You enjoy music. It triggers memory from a past time that you see value in. You recognize, and I have a lot of the people I work with do this, write down. I often do that with my the founders that I coach. Is like, I will write down for them everything they have versus what they're struggling with. And the disproportionality of how much we have, right? We have health. We have our bodies. We have our minds. We have friends. We have family. We have a job. We have choice, right? We have skills. We have income. I mean, like, the list is endless. Endless.
We have the ability that if you wanted to eat something right now, whatever it is, you can go get it.
And those are like the least important parts of all that you can be grateful for.
Freedoms.
But the part is you're on every given day indexing at 20 plus X things that you can be grateful for that are really fundamentally given to you in your life. They're there. They're there. That doesn't mean they can't be taken away. They can, all of them. But they are there. And then against that, you have what? Oh, well, you lost a deal. Or you wish you made a little bit more money. Or, you had a rough day. Or, your co-founder is difficult. Or, and okay, so sometimes they're much more significant than that. Your child has cancer, or your mother's dying. Yeah, there are. But even in that, you have gratitude to the last 50 years you spent with your mother. Like, how grateful are you to recognizing the beauty of that with all its ups and downs? Like, you can just take a moment and you look at it and you think about it and you allow yourself to be vulnerable. Gratitude requires vulnerability, which is why a lot of people struggle to be grateful. Because you have to recognize things that you have, things that you could lose, things that matter to you. You have to be in touch with yourself in that moment.
Do you see a commonality between successful founders that a lot of them had a loss when they were younger?
I would say, I don't know about a loss. And, again, the
or founder, trauma.
The founder of NVIDIA speaks to that, and a lot of other people have. Circumstantially, yes. You are forged in some way, shape, or form, and the circumstances and experiences of life. And so if you've had very limited exposure to
Trauma.
Anything that has refined your skills of coping with emotional stress, physical stress, loss, failure, rejection, like things that are just going to allow you to cope in life at a higher velocity and with better reactions and less triggers than somebody else who's never done it, never experienced this, never had. If you've only run a mile and somebody's been running marathons, and now you're like, suddenly you're faced with having to run a marathon to survive. Like, you're not playing the same game as the other guy. You're not. Like, so, the Goggins of the world and whatever else, and the Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, I mean, they all have some fundamental roots of, having to overcome, having to survive, having to prove themselves, having to, get parental approval or something where their parents neglected them or didn't love them and giving that the foundational environment. And depending on that, to be fair, is those guys had those things. Many of founders have those things. But there's also 85% failure rate, and there's also an entire society of people who never overcome those things. So, yes, those who have achieved more often come with paths that are of greater difficulty, and that help them forge skills and mindset and attitude that allows them to persevere as things get harder when you choose to do harder things. And those who have not, when they're faced with hard things, may unravel faster. But plenty of people who have lived hard lives, not by their choosing, but in their youth, also no longer want to have hard lives and thus will not do the hard things. Don't have the tools, don't have the mechanisms, don't have the mindsets, don't have the capacity.
They don't have the mental fortitude. Yeah.
In one way, shape, or another, a variety of circumstances doesn't make that something for them to engage in anymore. And so that is a greater proportion of people, because everybody in their own way, and again, we are a very privileged nation, but even here there's a lot of poverty, there's a lot of kids who are not eating every day, there's all sorts of things, right? So forget the rest of the world where it's 1,000 times worse than us. You are still facing that, and then you're facing that in an environment where ultimately you're only valued because you make a living, or you're only valued because of the bag you're holding or the shoes you're wearing, or so it's not like it doesn't get perpetuated. Like you struggle in one way, shape, or another. Again, society is 1% ultra rich and 10% better off, who own 60, 70% of all the wealth, and then everybody else, which is the other 300 million Americans. So it's like, okay, so those people don't have it hard for the most part, or not easy. And they're not better off from it for a wide range of circumstances in parenting and schooling and environments and friends and whatever. All those things that would need to change or be altered, or that someone would have to choose other than that to create a different outcome in life or different outputs in life. And so if you somehow don't connect with the difficulty, or you don't find passion in the problem, or you don't find resilience in the rejection and the friction, and somehow those things along the way don't give you hunger and a love of the process and a resilience to it, and in the doing of that, then you end up seeing more of yourself, growing faster, building more self-trust, self-worth, empowering yourself to more tools to be independently capable, less dependent on anything, thus less excuses, less justifications. It's kind of limitless after that.
Yeah.
So gratefulness is very important. Gratitude, gratefulness. It's an exercise of the doing.
Let's circle back to the initial question. And let's take away. So we're talking about weekly routines. When I mentioned to a couple handfuls of people, I'm interviewing Wilson Kriegel on next week again. If there's anything you could ask him, what would it be? And at least less than two hands of people I mentioned this to, and at least 3 or 4 people said, please ask him what he thinks is the most ideal morning routine. Because a lot of millennials, a lot of Gen Zs, they not think that there's like this magic pill, or everyone wants a magic pill, but they think that like there is, as you were saying, like all successful people practice gratitude. So they think that all successful people do fill in the blank to start their day.
Yeah. So if you can work out in the morning, you're better off for the rest of the day because you just did something hard. And your brain, not only the dopamine and the endorphins, trigger and make you experience thereafter in a significantly more welcoming and open and strong way in terms of just perspective of life and reality and how you're thinking and seeing things and reacting to them. But you just finished doing something hard that you don't actually want to do. One of the first things you don't do in the morning is to think about what you want to do. It's very different from choosing to be intentional about what you want to create for your day. Thinking about whether or not you want to go run is a lose-lose proposition, because in that is the overthinking, which leads to negativity, which leads to all the reasons why it's going to suck. I mean, we went running, I did 13 miles on Monday. It was 30 degrees. It was windy, right? My body's hurting from the double workout Sunday, right? It's like, and then you're like, oh my God, I'm doing this for a marathon, which is not a net positive. Like, you just know that that's going to be a nightmare, right? And so that there's no winning in that. Your brain is there to tell you all the reasons to why that's a net negative to you. That will make you slow down your process. That will make you find reasons to spend more time at home, drink your coffee a little bit longer, tell yourself how cold it is, wait it out. Maybe you start looking at your phone like, oh, it'll be warmer this afternoon. And you start the process and the engine of justification of excuses as a fundamental process to your entire day. So one of the first and most important things you don't do in the morning is to overthink and think what is that you want and don't want to do. Right? What you do want to do is you put your feet on the ground, right? And in that moment, you are actually connecting. You're connecting to the ground. You're connecting to Earth, and you in that moment can, choose what your day is your experience of your day is going to be like. Who do you want to be during your day? And you start thinking about the feelings of that, like the joyfulness, the gratitude, the excitement. Right? Then you start thinking about, okay, what do you want to focus on today that really matters to you, you got to solve, that you got to do? Because intrinsically, even though we keep ourselves busy and we find, we stack our calendar, making our feel important, that we have all these things to do, so much of it doesn't actually matter to what we really want to try to achieve. Right? And so what is it that you want to experience of your day? That starts setting your brain post to gratitude or around gratitude to like, okay, yeah, I really want to, I don't want to get triggered today. Like, I know I'm going to see my co-founder, we'll probably whatever, like, you know what, like, I'll be fine. Right? You're telling yourself a choice of reaction and self-awareness around what could be a nervous process of already engaging in your work environment because you're nervous about maybe getting triggered by your co-founder because you guys are arguing all the time. So now you're nervous about being nervous, right? So now your entire state, and Kobe talks about this, is diminished in its creativity and its capacity and its enthusiasm and its resilience because you've induced stress and anxiety and fear into it. So to me, it's like there's two sides to things. One is do something hard because everything gets easier for the rest of the day. And you're rewarded for having done it on a chemical, brain chemical standpoint, as well as in terms of how you feel your day and you feel about yourself, and you've empowered you. Like, you've already done something hard. You're ahead of everybody else who's avoiding and neglecting and bullshitting and excuses and complaining and blaming. Like, you already took accountability for your day and your health and your life in that moment, right? So that's extremely powerful in a positioning of your environment. You can then practice gratefulness and gratitude. You can journal. A lot of people do. You can then. I tell my founders, I'm like, control your day so you're not reactive to your day. So control what it is that you want to achieve. Control who you want to be in that. Control what you want to experience out of from it. Instead of, oh, look, I have a busy calendar. No, Sunday, blank calendar for the rest of the week. Plug in what matters to achieving what you want to have out of life happen. So Sunday, blank calendar. Okay, well, if sales is a big part of what has to happen for the business, what's your best window for sales for yourself or within the construct of the team? Is it 8 in the morning based on the clients to 12 because you're in person and you got to catch them at that moment? Is it 12 to 4 because your velocity and momentum and energy is spiking at that time, and that's when you just feel most capable of dealing with rejections and listening and whatever? Is it based on where your team is or whatever that may be on a time zone standpoint? But you bracket something that says, okay, sales is really the number one variable that will impact the business outcome. So you say, okay, I'm going to spend 40, 50% of my day sales. That's, boom, you're in there. You're in the calendar. That's in the calendar. Now, you can say, okay, I'm going to spend the next 3 days doing sales only, take Thursday off to do admin, legal, marketing, and then Friday I'm going to do whatever. Like, you can construct that. But you have to be intentional about how it is that you're creating value, solving problems, who you're working with, and how, and achieving, allocating the time for that and the focus of it. The worst thing you can do is to I'm going to do 10 minutes of emails. I'm going to do 10 minutes of sales. I'm going to do. The worst thing you can do is be like, show up with your week and your entire calendar is full. There's no productivity in that.
No productivity in your entire calendar
being full preemptively without you controlling that, choosing that. Oh, I've got this meeting. I've got this meeting. No, that's clearly you're not being very productive. That's just a lot of talking, a lot of listening, a lot of people complaining, that's just a lot of just noise. So it's like, okay, 40% has to be sales. Okay, 40% has to be sales. 50% has to be sales. Yeah, then you have your lunch. Great, go to the gym. Eat on the treadmill. Drink a shake.
Eat on the treadmill.
Drink a shake. You know what I'm saying? That's every day at noon.
Yeah.
You don't negotiate yourself. That's just a choice. That's the intention that you have for the value that it creates and it means to you. So if you choose...
Say that again, no negotiating with yourself.
No, you don't negotiate with yourself. Because then if you do, then how much do you care? How much value does it really have? You're then telling yourself that it's okay to negotiate and get high value items in your life?
If 70% of the time people are thinking negative thoughts and you're negotiating for yourself, then odds are 7 out of 10 times you're going to lose the battle.
And in terms of chemical and in terms of, I think it's like for one negative thought, you need 3 to 5 positive thoughts to offset the chemicals and the emotions in your mind. It's an enormous amount of work to be around negative people. It's an enormous amount of work to the inner voices are negative. And by the way, this isn't like I don't have a choice. No, you feed the wolf that survives. I mean, as somebody who spent 20 years in chronic medical depression, which I lost complete control over, that was my entire state. But that was also the only state that I chose to invest in. And by default, it became my identity. And by default, it became I'm different, I'm special. It became my narcissistic, identity of value. And people are like, what, you thought that being depressed was valuable? Yeah, it was different. Because if I was going to be the loser and the tool, and I had to be there, you had to be special, you had to be something, right? And that's where people will find validation in doing terrible things.
It's so negatively narcissistic of you.
Yeah, and it was my identity.
Yeah.
And it was so forged in me, and it was so just my chemical wiring, and that, when I was 22, 23, and the doctor was like, this isn't who you are. It doesn't have to be who you are the rest of your life. I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I couldn't even understand that there was any other functioning in my brain other than just, being sad and angry and struggling and negative thoughts and insecurities and crying, 89% of my day. And when he said that, I was like, I don't understand what you're saying. It was just this, and that became more of a reality, believe it or not, in the doing, where I ended up in track and field in college, and we ended up having some of the Atlanta team coaches of the Olympic team launched a program at our school, and we had to relearn how to run. So I only did 2 years of track and field in high school after I immigrated here, and then we jumped into college, and I had some. I had some skills there where clearly I could, grow, and I could be pretty decent at it. And they brought in these amazing coaches, and this was the Ben Johnson, the Johnson era, where the guy was like this perfect form who won the 200, the 400, the 200, the 100, it's like this machine, and they had this very unique technique of running. And we spent the entire first summer of, preschool program, summer camp for track, in a pool and on the track, never running, relearning the mechanisms of the form and the technique, and rehabitating our muscle memory through that for hours and hours, double practices a day, just the way our legs would bounce. And now it's like common practice in all track and field teams, and you see them doing it pre-runs, and there's all these motions, and they repeat the motions, and I was like, what are we doing? First track and field meet, I became national ranked athlete. And I was like, oh, there's something to the process now. Wow. I went from I didn't even know I could run to, ranking number 6 in the nation in long jump in one summer camp, 3 month of nonstop, of relearning something that you think you know. And that is your reality because you know it, so you believe it. So I thought I knew how to run. And then I was shown not that I didn't know how to run, but that I could learn how to run properly to be way, way more of a performer and output.
If you put in the work.
if you put in the work to learn what it takes. And so that was fundamental to me, like, oh, if you find ways to learn, and there are different ways to learn, and if you choose to embrace that despite not knowing what comes of it, or the fact that it would imply that you don't have the security or the confidence that you already know, which you get when you know or you believe, wow, look at all that can be. It's a magical thing. So what I ended up doing, I mean, if you go to double practice a day, there's a level of discipline and routines and habits around that. So that was also my first foray from a very chaotic parental chaos environment in public schools, and I had no structure whatsoever growing up. No habits, no skills, no talents. And then you get into that. That really starts shaping you. And then the result from that is, you get your varsity badge, or you get your letter, you get your jacket. Right? There's these dynamics where you're like, it's tangible outcomes with tangible possibilities that come from them. Now you're socially somebody at school. As somebody who was introverted, insecure, shy, wasn't social, wasn't very liked from...
So you got a Letterman?
I got a
Letterman?
Yeah, I have those.
You still have it?
Yeah, of course I do. And just because it's important to know where you remind yourself of how far you come, or where you're coming from, or what it took. Because what it took never stops. It's just what it takes. And I think one of the challenges that people stop is, you get good at something, and you're like, well, it took what it took, and now I'm here. No, it never stops. It just keeps on taking what it takes to get to every level that you want to get to.
Well, you have that gene.
So you learn the muscle of it.
Yeah.
Right? And so, for me, on a weekly basis, it's 5-6 days a week of working out. Cardio and lifting. And depending on if I'm training for a marathon or speed climbing a mountain or an Ironman, different levels of training, different levels of intensity. But if I'm 2 hours on average training per day, that's my baseline.
Are you bringing in, not specifically on a daily or weekly basis, but in the beginning of a training cycle, are you talking to a coach?
So the great thing when you start leveling up is that the people around you level up. And as people level up, then you learn great levels of skills and great levels of technique, and you're exposed to more people who you can just ask more things to, and then you realize that asking is just fantastic. And people want to tell you. Yeah. People who see people want to create, to build, to grow, they want to give you some of that. They want to give you some of that possibility. They want to give you some of that knowledge. They want to give you some of that skill. And there's also a ton of information online today, with terrible information and very good information. And so over time, I learned to expose myself to people always that were significantly more talented or further ahead than me. And even though I was very insecure, and the ego, the fear, the combination of I don't know. It was just like, when I started developing these personas in my 20s to expose myself and to challenge myself and to rewire myself and develop, kind of neuroplasticity, I started getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And you start doing that at the gym, or you start doing that being around people who are way more successful than you, where you don't belong. And you start doing that by, dancing on the dance floor without any alcohol. You start, next thing you know, you're on the table, right? Next you know, you have a shirt on. And that doesn't mean I'm not that insecure, shy guy. It just means okay, how do you get to that? How do you get to the guy who doesn't really care and is just having a good time, right? From the guy who's overthinking, who's worried that people are looking at him, who's in his mind and forgetting to enjoy the environment and listening to the music and just not giving a shit and just enjoying life.
You're speaking to me.
Right? So all these are progression-based environment where, in that you say, okay, well, then I have to go to the gym. I have to talk to certain types of people. I have to surround myself with certain kind of people. I have to choose to do things that I haven't done before. I wasn't a long-distance runner in college, but I became a long-distance runner after college. Why? Met a girl at a bar. She's like, I'm doing a 10K tomorrow. I was like, I don't know what that is, but I was a D1 athlete. She's like, what does that have to do with anything? And in my ego, I was like, I'm going to show up tomorrow. And you just kind of throw yourself out there. And I went to run a 10K. I had never run one before. Central Park 10K. There's 10,000 people. I was like, what is happening here? And I was bodybuilding at that time because I, went. You got to go far into your process. So I put on 25 pounds of muscle mass. I entered college at 155. I left college at 172, about 5% body fat. I peaked bodybuilding around 190, 5% body fat.
Woo.
And that was in a window of 4 or 5 years. Natural.
That's discipline.
Yeah. And they just remade that movie, Roadhouse, I think, with what's the actor and the MMA guy?
Gyllenhaal.
Yes. I looked exactly like him at 25. I looked like that. I actually took that picture and I was like, I have the same picture of me without a shirt on. You push yourself, right? Because the brain really has to come to believe that that is a new reality, a new paradigm.
Do you believe that it takes 21 days to create a habit?
I don't know exactly the facts of that or how they come up to that number. I believe it takes time. I don't think 21 days is enough, to be candid, because 21 days is such a short window of a cycle that it doesn't really represent every single circumstance of life. That's going to get in the way of whether or not you can sustain that habit. So realistically, you don't really know whether or not that habit became discipline until you're forced to doing over different contexts of different stages of your life. Then you know that you're at that level. Like when you have kids and you're like, I'm so tired, I'm not going to the gym. Well, then you know that little habit of 21 days 10 years ago made me shit. That's your reality. So I challenge myself all the time around that. I don't live by the past dynamics of that being enough. You got to really know that, okay, I got to work out. I got to eat pretty healthy. I got to socialize a little bit. I have to have intimacy. And so then it's like, what's the right formula for you for what you value most or trying to achieve? But you have to have some of these, like in some proportionate ways in which you can, it's not balance. It's balance in the context of outcomes and outputs that you choose are priorities. So every week, every day, and I don't look at things on a daily basis, it just ultimately apply themselves on a daily basis. And I tell this to my founders, I'm like, okay, you have to have at least one night a week of socializing. Like go see some friends, go hang out, go let it be, right? You got to make sure you get on your treadmill and your elliptical. You got to get some cardio 3 times a week minimum. Right?
For how long?
It's 30 to 40 minutes.
Okay, so like if someone's like, I can't do it today, I'm
of
tired.
Of course you can.
What's give me at least minimum 30 minutes on the treadmill.
30 to 40 minutes. Yeah, I love the 30 to 40 is the right number. Because you want to see some results from it. You want cardiovascular results, you want weight results, you want looks, you want feel, you want chemicals, you want achievements in the brain. And so that there has to be a minimum amount to that. Of course, in this day and age, you've got the 10-minute workouts, but like
you got the magic pill.
But time matters in how you apply yourself. If you're like, I'm going to go run a marathon, you only ran 5K, I don't care that you only ran 5K and you did it every day. It's just not enough, right? So like there's just some basic requirements to how you grow in anything, and you got to apply yourself over time to that. And so those are all very important. Intimacy matters a great deal to people. If you disconnect too much from intimacy, you're really disconnecting from vulnerability, from empathy, from support systems that are closer to your inner core than they are just superficial on the social construct standpoint. And that will erode you in time to, are you really your own humanity? Like it will just gradually distance you from being anything else than the engine you're creating for the output of, a company or a job or, something that you feel is really important in that moment, or just climbing that one mountain, whatever that may be. Like you still have to have some dynamics of that. So eating healthy, not drinking very much or very often at all. And again, there's certain stages, where those things can all happen together. When I was in my 20s, I club promoted 4 days a week, 5 days a week, we were out. I drank 10 to 15 drinks a night. I was still 5% body fat. I worked out 2 days, I did 10Ks every day. I worked out and lifted an hour every day. Like, I had a full-time job. I was a multimillionaire. Like, I was hanging out with celebrities. Like, it's possible. People thought I was constantly on some drug, right? Like, but ultimately, it's just more of the engine and what you can do at a certain age versus what you can. I almost never slept because I have sleep PTSD and sleep trauma and all these other things. So I wasn't even like, I was just on hyperdrive all the time. Everybody's construct's a little bit different. But if you have decent food habits, if you work out 3-4 days a week, if you have moments of intimacy, and again, you don't have to feel like that's what you want to do, but you have to do it. And that's something that people just don't want to really accept. They think that their life is their feelings. Your life is not your feelings. Your life is your thoughts, which, create your emotions and your chemicals, which then, give context to your feelings, which you place definitions on. And that kind of starts driving, your sense of reality and whatever.
It's because, for lack of a better words, doing easy things is not hard. So by not even giving yourself that 45 minutes a day, we'll call it, is easy.
The brain really,
because on that day, how's it really going to affect the rest of my day?
Yeah,
but those pile up.
Yeah, and so you have to start to, and everything's progressive, right? Like if you can start with 20 minutes, do 20 minutes. But just the fact that you showed yourself to be able to do that. Like we have a running club, Pitch and Run, and we have a lot of first-time runner every week, and they're like, oh, I've never run, or I don't come and run. I used to run.
So I just started following them following Pitch and Run on IG.
Yeah.
Do you guys do 13 miles every run?
No, that's just my run.
Well, I saw that. I was like, that's kind of intimidating.
Yeah, of course it would be.
So you want me to just show up in 30
that's
degrees
exactly
weather?
That's what we don't want, right? People to think that we're running a 7-minute pace on 13 miles. What we have is we meet twice a week at 9 a.m. And we do 2.2 miles, 2.3 miles. We take a picture stop, people mingle, and then we run 2.3 miles back. It's 4.6 miles. It's at a pace of 8 to 10 and a half minutes. And what it is, it's a community about people supporting each other in their commitments and their intents, right? And there's a lot of founders and entrepreneurs and
Monday weather weather is looking pretty good.
Yeah, and so
Friday weather is looking even better.
Yeah, so it's a community of and then we have a chat room. There's almost 200 people in there. They're all founders, entrepreneurs. Yeah, and you have to have run 5 times. That's the only thing that's required.
To get to the WhatsApp.
Yeah, and people actually after 2 months are like, I want to get to that WhatsApp. There's events, conferences, startup information, job searches, all sorts of stuff. That there are 200 people who are intentional in their careers and in their. But I had one of my prior employees who's like, oh, I haven't run the past year. I'm like, dude, just show up. Just show up.
So Pitch and Run is every Monday and Friday
at 9 a.m. at the Bluestone Chelsea Piers.
Piers.
And, it was founded, with Nihal, who has ENIAC Ventures, one of the best seed funds and probably top 3 in the city and in New York. Kevin Weatherman, who's an entrepreneur, as well as had a huge exit with Mopub and his founder, which was the base for Twitter advertising. Myself, and so there's like a slightly older guard, and then there's 220 to 35-year-olds who are building their first company, building their second. We have moms who have like 90 plus marathons in. We have guys who are pacers for the Olympics. But everybody it's a non-running discriminatory environment. Like it's basically you have immigrants. One of my favorite person there, Avantika, she's a venture capitalist woman who grew up in India and who had Mother Teresa in her house, almost every other week because her mother helped build the orphanages for Mother Teresa in India. And you're like, you grew up with Mother Teresa, which probably means nothing to 90% of people who may be watching this. But, it's a little bit like a sad Guru Dalai Lama moment. And I'm like, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Like that was your weekend person? Like, how wild is that? So there's just an enormous group of very interesting people and people who are nascent in their entire process and people who, and it's just a support community. Like, it's like, okay, well, I'm looking for this, or I just got rejected here, or, is there an event for this, or do you know anybody at this firm? And it's just an enormous amount of information flow and support system. And now we have chapters in Austin, in Chicago, in LA, in Atlanta. And it's just fostering a community of people who are intentional and are seeking support and just the ability to discover and challenge themselves. And some people are first-time runners will lose over the next year 20 pounds just coming on Fridays with us and then start running. And it's fascinating.
L.A.,
Austin. Chicago, Austin, Atlanta.
And same thing Monday, Friday, 9 a.m.?
Yep. No, they have their own hours with their own chapter leads. But the biggest one is New York because we've been doing it 5 years now. But people will come and they're like, I'm not a runner. It's okay. Just show. And sometimes they don't finish.
You can run.
Yeah, you can
run. And you're here to network.
Yeah. Sometimes they'll walk the second half or they'll walk to finishing. But we encourage them.
So it's all in all like 5 miles.
Yeah. But the most important part is that you told yourself you would show up. You showed up. We have a gratitude circles on Friday and what are we looking forward to circle on Monday. Everybody gets to introduce each other. We're not here like, okay, the pacing groups, and that's not what it's about. You're going to pace what you're going to pace with the person you want to talk to. Right? That's what it's about. Right? And you're going to come, and we'll wait 5 or 10 minutes as a group, take a little picture as a group, right? And people mingle, catch a breath, and then come back. And the running ultimately has led to people who have never done a half, never done a 10K, never done a marathon, doing that within the first year of running when they were like, I'm not a runner. Right? And so they put fear in front of themselves. They put justification in front of themselves. And we're like, just show up. And because the first thing we do is express gratefulness for what our week was, or what it is and who we are, what we're doing, how you learned about us, and then what are you grateful for this week, right? And people are like, oh, I'm seeing my mom. I haven't seen her in 6 months. Like, it's just that simple. But in that moment, intimacy is created. Authenticity to some extent is created.
Empathy.
Right? Empathy. And now it's like, okay, well, I know what you do. That's interesting to me, right? It may not be interesting to somebody else. Great. Doesn't matter. So it's very much of an environment where you get out of it what you put in, but we don't discriminate what you put in. We don't discriminate just to who gets to show up or doesn't get to show up or what your purpose is. It's just the intention that matters. And it's been an unbelievable experience because for us as kind of the guys who brought this off the ground, we're influencing and impacting hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of people's lives through this inner circle that's constantly growing of people whose life and directional outputs and outcomes in life is being changed through positivity, through support, through a network of people who are like from all over the world, all different cultures, all different backgrounds. And honestly, I think maybe twice in 4 or 5 years, we've had I would say kind of friction, disparity issues in the chat room. That's it. Because ultimately people just want to be there, not to pacify or, validate people. They just, hey, do you know somebody there? And somebody's like, yeah, I know somebody there. And if you don't have anything to say, you don't say anything. It's much more about structural feedback and opportunities and, oh, there's an event. Hey, if you guys want to come to this event, I'm doing this event on biotech or I'm doing this event on prop tech. Okay, great. And there's all industries, biotech, prop tech, construction tech, software, AI. It's all over the place. And, first-time founders, second-time founders, pre-seed, seed. And so there's just this enormous velocity of interaction, and we've had ski trips now that are being spinned off of, pitch and ski, and it's great. I mean, and you make of it what you want, but it's available to you with no expectation other than your attitude.
And it sounds like showing up would even just be
it's all that matters.
And it sounds like showing up would just be an education in itself.
Yeah, and so what I found is like the people were like, oh, I can't run or I don't run, or they do one run and they're like, oh. And then within, even though they're struggling to like recommit to the next one, within 4 weeks they'll do 1 or 2 more, and then they're in. And that same person then says, best part of my week is showing up here the following 2 or 3 weeks.
I'm thinking now as you're talking, like, where am I going to park? Okay, I could park right across the street. And then I'm like, why don't I just take a city bike there? And
yeah, I mean, again, there's always reasons why it doesn't work. There's always reasons why it does work.
And now I'm thinking like the people who because you're saying someone loved it so much, came back 4 weeks later. That means that there was 8 runs in between.
They didn't show up.
Each run.
Yeah.
That she woke up that morning and probably out of those 8 runs, at least 4 or 5 of them, maybe all 8 of them, she woke up wanting to go but made an excuse.
Yeah, and there's now a saying inside the chat room after years of, which is what would Wilson do? It's a hashtag. It's WW.
I was going to say, what is it? Don't be a bitch.
No, there's what would Wilson do? Everybody's got their different personalities and character traits and approach to communication, and, I certainly have mine.
Yeah.
And it's fairly direct. I'm not really here to cajole anybody or, sometimes I get reeled back in by my, founders, Hal and Kevin, who are like, take it easy. I'm passionate.
Yeah.
I love it. I hate I love it so much that I hate to see people short themselves. And so my reactions is often to the bullshit that people are allowing themselves to engage in with themselves. It makes no difference to me. I'm going to do me. I'm going to live my life. Like, I'm going to create my world. But, it's just so there for people. But they, whether it's fear, whether it's a lack of commitment, lack of habits, it's the little things along the way. And you're like, oh, man, it's all there for you. You're just not really committing to the process. And if you choose to, then, it's all going to just get better. Like, it always just gets better. It doesn't get easier, per se. It doesn't not hurt. There isn't failure. All these things stay real. But I go back to okay, and one of the questions that you had was around, how do people cope or deal or approach fear? Which is, to your point, like a major hindrance, fear of failure, fear of discovery, right, of not belonging, or fear of pain, whatever, fear of uncertainty. I think it goes back to you have to earn it within yourself to know that you can do and handle anything. And if you, anxiety often and stress often comes from either projecting forwards or living in the past, and us creating emotions and thoughts that really create uncertainty, and then uncertainty can be fear. And so those thought patterns of not living presently and not being grateful or not being engaged in the process lets your mind wander and the imagination wander, and in that, for a lot of people, is a lot of negativity. And that then triggers your fears and triggers your insecurities. Or what's the counter to that? Well, if you're in the doing, and if you're in the presence, and if you're applied, what are you gaining? Well, output, self-confidence, skills, self-awareness. Like, the greatest counter to actually having any fear or having, all that anxiety is to actually just do something now. If I'm overwhelmed, with some relationship issue with my father, or, like something that is, consuming me too much, fucking put the 50-pound backpack on and go in the stairs for 2 hours. Control my fear, control my pain, control the value of that.
You do that?
And of course I do. Because you have a choice. You're going to suffer either way, right? Suffering is a part of life, right? And nobody hurts you as much as you hurt yourself through your inner voices and inner stories. So that is time and energy, is what you're losing for zero output in that world. There is no output of positivity or progress or upside in the inner voices of negativity and self-deprecation and and insecurity. There's no gaining in any of that. So what do? Well, you go show yourself that you're more than that. You got to do something. So I often, if I am struggling to stay focused because I'm consumed with some negative thoughts, and I'm struggling in that inner battle, I take myself out of that into the doing in a way that is undeniable in its impact to me. And so I go do something harder than what's hard right now. And in that, I regain myself because I take control back of my experience, my actions, my feelings, right? And then the physical experience of it. And then I'm always training for something, so I'm benefiting because now I'm investing into something that matters to me, and I've regained my self-worth and my self-respect in the process. And then my brain is validated for having done something hard that I know I can do no matter what. I chose to then do something harder than what I was not controlling, that was controlling me. That's very powerful.
Yeah.
And that's very, very much of a Goggins thing, right, and how he managed himself. But it really is fundamentally true to a lot of things of how do you overcome anything? Well, you take little steps towards it. You cannot overcome something that you do not work for, that you do not learn for, that you do not work towards or walk towards. There's no way, right? If you fear the dark, go in the dark and realize there's nothing in the dark. Because that is truth. That's actual reality. The rest is just imagination and stories. But if you don't know you're capable of doing that, then how do you do anything? And so you don't, if you're afraid of, if you're afraid of heights, maybe don't jump off of a plane. But you can go up a couple of stairs. Prove yourself, prove your brain and yourself that you can master that. You do it 5 times. Great. I can guarantee you after you've done that 5 times, you can go to the 10th floor. Guarantee you. You will now rationalize that it's not so bad. You will be less anticipating of how much you feared the first 5 floors or any floors.
It's like financial literacy, but with life. It's like just knowing that you can compound facing your fears and compound facing your fears, and you'll just be stronger at moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, how do people end up, taking on a 100-mile race? Or, well, they don't just show up for the 100-mile race. They progressively make themselves believe through the doing and the actions and the training and the process that they can actually get there. And then when it's time to do it, they don't think about doing it. They just do it. Right? Because there's no way that your brain's going to rationalize, which is what we are trying to do in creating safety and security, is rationalize outcomes that we don't know. That doesn't work. But if you've done it, if you've done 50 miles, suddenly the 100 miles rationally actually seems much more feasible.
Yeah.
Right? If you've never climbed 10,000 feet of vertical gain and somebody's like, we're going to go climb 10,000 feet of vertical gain today, 15 hours. You're like, I can't do that. But if I'm like, hey, let's go do 500 feet. Let's go to Bear Mountain. I'll take a couple hours, we fucking relax, we just do it. And oh shit, that's fucking nice. I like the walk, the mountain, the environment. Wasn't stressed. We got to the top. The views were amazing. Feel super rewarded. I kind of like this, right?
Now, how do we get down?
You walk back down. You pay that price as well because if you go up, you got to go down of everything in life. But now you know that Bear Mountain is a cool experience, right? It's an approachable experience. It's a rewarding experience. It's a worthy experience. So now you're like, oh, I wonder what bigger mountains around here that I could probably get onto, and whether or not there's a friend who wants to do that with me because I'm not really ready to go alone. And go alone then. And then you find that little bigger mountain that's instead of an hour hike is 2-hour hike. Now your brain knows that it can do an hour in 2 hours. So somebody suddenly comes around like, hey, I was thinking about going to Colorado and doing a 12,000 feet mountain. And you're like, oh, I don't know, but it sounds exciting because now you've seen those 2 peaks. You've gotten your brain to actually finishing something that you weren't sure about, but now you know you can. And that is the certainty of removing fear.
So on the subject of, exercising your brain, how do you feel about meditation?
I think it's great. I think everybody. It was a big struggle for me personally because I don't get a lot of brain rest and I have hyperactive kind of activity up there, and it's very difficult for me. So what I've chosen to do, for example, is to go into yoga, where the physical and the flow state can come together, where the distraction of me feeling a little bit of tension and pressure, or physical presence allows me to actually remove all the noise and all the voices. Now, some people are very capable of doing that standing still. And so in one way or another, I think that finding flow state and finding states of meditation, which doesn't mean you're actually removing all your thoughts at all, but is, again, it's great. Is that the end-all and be-all to anything? There's no end-all and be-all to anything. There's just different sets of tools that people can use to make progress and to accomplish things, and that you can continue to improve on and excel and add to your stack. It's like, why wouldn't you if you see value in it and if you are trying to achieve certain things and accomplish? Again, you want to run a marathon? Well, what is it going to take? Is the first question you're going to ask yourself. That's what you should ask yourself. Not can you not, is it going to hurt? I try to tell people this all the time. I no longer, and it's been fairly a couple of decades now, ever ask myself, is it going to be hard, easy, painful? Those are not questions I ask myself in anything that I choose to do. I'm completely focused on my what and my why. Is it hard? Who cares? Maybe, maybe not. Does it matter? Is it going to hurt? Does it matter? If your what and your why is what matters, then the only thing that really matters is what is it going to take? What do I need to learn? Who do I need to become? Who do I need around me? What is it going? What do I have to apply myself to? How do I change my calendar? How much money? You go into the process, and then you start defining the logistics of it and figuring out how that fits in your existing commitments and your existing process, and where that fits in in the pyramid of your value system. And again, I ended up speed climbing some 139 mountains in 2.5 years, right, across the world, because I got signed up for 29.029 by Colin O'Brady and Jesse Isler, 29,000 feet of vertical gain, 29 miles, right at COVID, and I didn't know Colin O'Brady, who holds world records for different mountaineering and adventuring dynamics, and he had done that. He owned the world record for the 50 highest points in the U.S., North Pole, South Pole, and 7 summits in a single year, right? So, and I was and he was crossing Antarctica solo, self-carry, self-rescue, and I found him to be fascinating. Young guy, he was a triathlete, college athlete, ended up with an enormous leg injury, burn. He almost amputated his leg, whatever, and then they were like, "Oh, you're done," as always the story goes. And then he found himself back through all these kind of extreme experiences, which now that I'm in them, they don't seem so extreme anymore. But and I always loved the outdoors, and the mountain for me and the hiking or the running was always kind of my sanctuary. It was always where I could flow and remove myself from the rest of the world and the noise and the influence and my insecurities and how I always thought people would judging me or whatever it was. And so I liked Colin's venturing and challenges. I was parenting 2 kids full time. Their mom was working. I was retired at that point. It's late 2019, early 2020. And so, moved the family to Salt Lake City, Park City area for during COVID, Sedona. Like, why be in New York City if you don't have to?
Sounds beautiful.
It was fantastic. So, 2 favorite years of my life. But again, in the action, it's like, oh, COVID. Why would I want to stay in my apartment? I have money. Great, let's go rent an Airbnb. Nobody's in Airbnbs. They're free. Right? Sedona, 4 month. Fantastic. Nobody around. No mask. Playgrounds for yourself. You walk outdoor, the entire desert and Red Rocks are around you. Right? Just play football around with my kids all day and soccer and walking and stroller. I mean, like, you had the whole to yourself because there's nobody. Like, it was, and we did the same Park City and same Breckenridge and, spent all 2021 in the mountains. Epic. And I with my kids from 5 in the morning because she worked New York hours and even though we weren't together, so we were cohabitating and co-parenting. And I got these big houses where we could all be comfortable and she could be comfortable as somebody who wasn't, we weren't in a relationship. And this is some of the best years of my life. But I got into that and then, I have 2 kids. One's 1 year old. The other one's, I think 7 of that or whatever it was, 7 or 8. And she's got a full-time job. And I was like, well, I'll do this over the next 5 years. Why don't, what am I going to do now that I'm not building more companies? That was who I was, and that's great. But now I want to try to do other things. So like, what can I do? And my number one decision around that was where I'm nobody. Where can I do something, and what can I do that I'm going to be very excited and passionate about, and and want to do and find love in, where I'm nobody. Because everybody's like, I'll do another startup and this and this and.
What do you mean by nobody?
I had no experience, no skills, no credibility, no respect. I didn't know how to do it. I'm nobody. And that's how I picked that challenge. Of course, I had an affinity for the nature. I had an affinity for sports, right? And in that, I have some foundation. But I've never mountaineered. I've never put on crampons. I never held an ice axe.
I don't even know what crampons are.
Yeah, so, and I was like, but this is exciting.
Yeah.
Like I can travel the world and go to these places and be on a mountain and whatever, and there's a combination of adventuring to that and process to that and athleticism to that, and then learning. But I fundamentally was nobody, and so I actually also met Nimsday at the same time, who holds the record for the 14 Peaks for a long period of time and did that whole documentary 14 Peaks on Netflix, and it was right before he went to Everest, where he took that picture that made him infamous while he was trying to achieve 14 peaks in the fastest time ever. They were all basically over 26,000 feet. So all of them are death zone range.
How dangerous is that?
Extremely dangerous. What people don't understand, and quickly a side note, when they see people and they see bodies up there and they see people walking by them or people just dying and they're leaving them there is, because that person who's walking by is also dying. So you are dying watching other people die. Your body is literally dying as you're trying to go 26,000, 27,000, 28,000, 29,000. It's why it's called the death zone. So if you stop to help somebody else with the very limited of energy and capacity and strength that you have, and if anything happens that somehow becomes a problem you lose a crampon or something, you get a hole in your jacket or you're dead. So it is an extreme environment where there's so many variables you do not control. And the ones you do, you cannot afford to not be 150% in on. And most of the death happened on the way down of Everest and most climbing dynamic because you're so exhausted that you completely lose the capacity to maintain discipline and structure. And so most death happened on the way down from Everest. So you've summited, now you die. The vast majority of the death. And it's a very high risk environment. But it's just 1% to 2% on a season basis of 300 climbers, 250 climbers. So you're dealing with, terrible seasons. You'll have 20 because if there's an avalanche, right, that goes into camp or anything that happens with while people are really summiting, then it wipes out a bunch of the Sherpas, and the climbers and at once, right? So it's just terrible luck. But in terms of just individuals succumbing to the process of summiting and going down, it's 5-10 a year. Sounds like a lot, but it's really a tiny number. I mean, actually, the Mont Blanc.
Death is still death.
Yeah,
those people who made it there because they are uber skilled. They are skilled
Yes.
at climbing.
Yeah,
They
had to
told
do
their
it.
friends and family, I'm going up.
Yeah.
They probably went on social media
Yeah.
and said, I'm going up.
Yes. And by the way, all those bodies are still up there.
All those bodies.
Of those dead people for the past 50 years are still up there. You can't take them down. There's no way for you to drag a body down. There's no helicopter that can go that high. They freeze, and they get left there. There is no burial. That's it.
It's terrible. It's scary. Do you fear death?
I fear not living enough. I don't fear death because you don't control that part of life. You control how much you put into life and how much you lived and whether or not you lived enough of it. Because only that, if you get a long enough life, will that lead to regret, which is a poison pill for something you can never solve. And that's miserable of a circumstance and outcome in life. If all you have before you die is regret, like, that's hell on earth. So I actually feared not living enough, like, deeply. I'm prone to every day, like, I didn't do enough. Like, every year, I didn't do enough. Like, and in that catches me to, like, oh, was I disciplined enough? Was my habits enough?
It's like a billionaire being upset that he doesn't have more money.
No, I don't look at it as like I'm not good enough. The number doesn't define me. The billionaire defines him.
Right, but it's the same concept.
I think it's
the
actually
same
very
concept.
different. For me, it's like everything that's possible to experience in life and be, and whether or not you engaged in that process, because it's so finite. Like, you have your child now, and as you see your child evolve and grow, the context and the relative sensitivity of how fragile as well as vulnerable as well as limited life is, if you're present, accentuates. And so you not only want to be more involved in life, you want to be more present in life. And you want the greatest possible experiences of life. And that's something that you have to choose to do. So, if you have a choice between traveling the world and not traveling the world, like, that's a choice. Like, I was talking to my son around the dynamic of, like, somebody chose to be on the court side tickets, Madison Square Garden, and somebody chose to be in a nosebleed. Somebody chose that being there was mattered to them. And by the way, if somebody who's middle class wants to be courtside, he's going to spend the next 20 years saving to be courtside for that $20,000 ticket. That's a choice. Or he's going to figure out a way to make that money. That's the choice. The rest is a lot of excuses, right? Because at some point, accountability for your own life is just a fact, right? Or else it's victimization and not a whole lot of anything else. Because there's always going to be a reason why you don't have something that somebody else has. So the question is, what do you want? Right? And that goes back to, well, and then who do you have around you? One of your topics I think is very important. Well, when you're young, you probably don't have a whole lot more than what's made available to you, right? And that, by default, becomes a bit of your learning pad, like your growth pad, your learning dynamics of habits and justifications or validation or...
Yeah, I was actually talking with a buddy of mine in the sauna this morning. He was one who wanted me to ask you about morning routine.
Yeah.
But we were talking about exactly that, how you grow up and the people around you or what's put around you. You essentially don't have a choice.
You don't have a choice.
And like, are these your real friends? Probably not. And then as you get older, when you hit your 30s, your late 30s, now you could really not dismiss people from your life, but it's just making the decision that we aren't friends.
Yeah.
We aren't colleagues. We were colleagues. We might have been friends, sort of, and now here is what's valuable to me moving forward.
I actually come to realize it starts as a tween.
As a tween?
Yeah, you get to choose. Within the circle of friends, that's cool. Within your classmates, within your sports team, if there's 12 players on the team, who are you choosing to associate with? Even as a 12-year-old. I have those conversations with my son. Right? If you're getting in trouble at school, are you the troublemaker or are you hanging out with people who are in troublemakers? There's a choice because somewhere else there's somebody who's just studying at the desk. That person is still also in your environment. So, public school projects, gangs, this, that, whatever, but there's still people who are not that. So there's still a choice. Subconscious, triggers, survival, maybe. Right?
So do you say to your kids this do you say to them, you are the sum of the 5 people you hang with most?
I already have this conversation with my 12-year-old. I had those for a while.
Of course.
Yeah. But going back to Melina, who's the swimmer, who's better than my son, I explained to him why he should be spending more time with her. Because she's better than him. And I love it. And I love the fact that he's cognizant of the fact that if they're swimming, and they're always the first because they do it by kind of a level of so that people can pace themselves inside the pool. So they go first all the time. So they're always facing each other. And I see him, the days that he's committed to the process and during practice, and they always have them time 45 to 50 minutes in the training, every session, every practice, which is mind-blowing to me because you would think they want them to. But they time them and they challenge and they race them at the end of practice. And I see him when he wants it.
Is that just because of scheduling, or is that a psychological thing?
With the kids that they practice them that way? I'm not sure why it is that they train them that way.
I'd love to know.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. Again, I don't get involved in the coaching. I care about how my kids behaves in the coaching environment, and so when I see him, even if he's not winning, but I see him, and I videotape my kids doing everything. I picture my kids every day, but I see him challenging himself. I love it. I don't care that he didn't win. I never challenge my son to whether or not he's number one or the best. I don't find that to be valuable. I challenge him to whether or not he did his best. Now he tried. Tried doesn't mean anything. Did you do your best? That's very different from trying or being the best. I find that making only the best the criteria for anything is really, really counterintuitive to growth and helping people find purpose in their own choices of the process. Because you're not going to be the best. So then what are you? You're nothing? Like that's not really healthy to me. But doing your best versus trying. Trying comes with a big formula of excuses and justification and mash pit of, mental masturbation. But doing your best is just doing your best. That's all. You left it all on the table. And you didn't win on that day. That's okay. But it's very noticeable, a kid who's leaving it all on the table at practice. And I teach him that if he does it that way at practice, he will be able to compete that way in any given moment and any given time. So they see me training. Most people are like, oh my God, I'm training for the London Marathon, and I only know how to train my way. Right? Everybody's training their own way. There's all these different methods and these different running clubs. And my training is my training. It works for me. It's proved to work pretty well for me. I can always improve, and there's things for me to do. And so one of the guys I'm running with, I'm doing the miles 48 days a week. I'm running every day. I'm putting in 50 miles a week, this and that. And I've got a completely different training practice and dynamic. And I'm like trying to get to my 7-minute half marathon pace and then grow from there. And he's mitigating and managing for downtime against his if he's starting at 7:40, he wants to finish at 7:20. He's doing his 18 milers, 20 milers, right? And I'm like, great, that's what works for you. And he's like, yeah, you're overrunning. I'm like, no. Like, I'm building my base differently than you're building yours. Because in the end, I think my mental strength is going to be stronger than his just because of who I am over the past 30 years.
Well, we know that.
But so I'm like, okay, the last 6 miles, it'll just be a battle with myself. But if I can pace at a 7:10, 7:15 on the first 16, 18 miles, then yeah, I have a good chance of beating my goal, right? Whereas he's like, I got to put in the miles, and I got to pace, and I got to do the track, and I got to do all these things. And he's become a great runner, and I'm really excited about us running this one together. And he's beat me once in the past 10 years, and I think he's framed it. But like, the motivation isn't to beat him. The motivation is whether or not I can, in 4 weeks of training versus his 4 months of training, can I run just as fast as him?
I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
And he's going to be at London with you.
Yeah. But so with the kids, I go more on, what did you learn today? How do you feel about what you did? How was your interaction with the teacher? And if my son's on the bench and he plays 2 minutes, right, in basketball, he's on the basketball team, smallest kid on the team, at the end of the game, I will speak about why they lost the game. Attitude. It's never skills. Most of the time, the kids at this age lose because of attitude, discipline, laziness, not running back, right? So I lean into that. I never lean into, well, they're, and I never say, well, they were just better than you. Now, that is not a reason why you lost. Everything you didn't do to win is why you lost. And sometimes on any given day, you're going to lose. But I go, why didn't you play more? And I'll be like, I don't know. I was like, why didn't you ask the coach? Well, I was like, if you want to play more and you love this game, you should go ask your coach, what is it going to take to play? How do you get more minutes? What do you need to improve? If you don't do that, then how much do you care about playing this game that you love?
You're showing him that you're fine with sitting over there.
This is what you wanted. This is what you got.
Yeah.
Don't complain about being on the bench.
It's all attitude.
Yeah, so for me, it's like, here are the ways that you can offset the fact that you're on the bench for one reason or another. You got to go ask. And then you have something to work with. Then you have a chance to actually change something that will get you to some outcome, that you will like more. Right? And that matters to me a great deal, because that's going to be the rest of his life. I in front of me are parents who are sitting like, so unfair, look how tall this kid is. It's so unfair, look how much stronger they are. It's so... What? And their kids goofing around the court, doing cool sign, not running back, trying to throw the three like they're Steph Curry. And I speak to my son around that. That's a problem. Just play the game. Stop watching Instagram, and TikTok, and thinking that this is a video game. Go to practice, right? Learn technique. Learn the runs. Learn the game.
Fundamentals.
Learn the fundamentals, right? Take your 50 shots at the free throw line. Take your 50 shots at the 3-point line. Like, develop your skill sets. Develop your muscle memory. Like, learn how to post picks. This is tween games. Like, it's not that complicated. And in no way, shape, or form are you allowed to jog back on defense or offense. Why are you even playing the game if you're going to jog? Like, what's the purpose then of me coming here? Or you being on the team? I do not care about the other kids. I don't care about the other parents. I don't set my standards based on any of that. Otherwise, your floor is really low.
Yeah.
So, again, for me to be able to make any of such claims, as in a parent who's just sitting on the couch eating chips and watching TV, how is he going to be able to tell his kid to do something hard? Or that he's not enough? Or that he should try something else? Or that he should try harder? When he, as a human being, is sitting on the couch and has done nothing or achieved nothing or chosen to do very little. I'm not referring to the people who are working 2 jobs a day at the factory and overnight truck drivers. Like, they're working their asses off. Like, they're working. And hopefully they're explaining to their kids in the process of that why they made those choices, why they are where they are, why they're not proud of that, but they're proud of how hard they're working to give their kids a better opportunity or a better chance. And then every chance they get, they're investing in their kids' ability to be more than that, right? And who they chose to be or circumstantially are now. That's why I go to the playground with my son all the time. That's why I pick my kids up every day at school, like, because that's where the parenting happens, right? And that I'm very committed to. It's an enormous amount of commitment. So as I got into climbing, how do you manage all these different variables of commitment and expenditure? It's super easy. There's only 1 or 2 things that can really matter at a company, in your relationship, and what really truly matters to your happiness and joy. There aren't 10 things. We tell ourselves there's 10 things because it allows us to be really lazy and half-baked about everything, and because we're distracted and we're letting other people define things for us. But fundamentally, joy and happiness in a relationship, the joy and happiness and health of your kids and your experience around that, once you have them, are they really fundamentally, when you're going to look back from what you've learned of your parents or of your grandparents, and you look in the environment, the context of life, things that are going to matter significantly more than that when it's all said and done? No. There isn't. So then it's like, okay, well, that's my pyramid. It's like I have to over-index on that. So then anything else beyond that has to fit within my over-indexing on that. So then how did I end up speed climbing? Because if it takes 60 days to do Everest, and the mother of my children looks at me and goes, wait, you're going to train, do this, do that, right? And then you're going to go take 60 days to climb a mountain that is just for you? That's not putting those 2 things first. Kids, family. Fair enough, right? So then it's like, okay, well, how do I make this happen then? What do people do? People speed climb. Okay, well, how does speed climb work? Okay, well, you got to sleep in a hypoxico tent for X amount of time, and you got to, do elevation training as often as possible, and you got to take some meds, and you got to put your life at risk at a much higher velocity, right, of circumstance, of acclimatization and risk and failure rates, right? So let's say that I'm doing Denali speed climbing. Normal average is 21 days. That's the 3-week program that they put people into in groups. And I'm like, well, groups immediately is undermining of a speed climb because then you're dependent on the least capable person. So your entire experience and output because of risk management, timelines, is the least skilled, least capable, least attitude person on that group. So I'm never doing groups. If you want to speed climb, most people cannot do groups. They're not fit enough. So now you got to get 2 pro climbers, right, to offset, for safety as well as now you got to pay those people the value of 7 or 8 people that would have been in a group.
Jeez.
Right? Okay, so now your expenditure is 10x what it was originally. Then you got to be trained at a level where these guys are going to be willing to risk their life to speed climb versus just climb in a much more safe environment, either to save your life or their own, right? So you got to find those guys. Then they got to trust that you're doing what it takes to be at that level. Then you got to do the work to be at that level, right? And you have to be able to, and then you got to show up and do that. And so if it's 50% rate of success for Denali and the average is 17 days, how do you think 4 days works out? Right?
Tough.
Yeah, what you have to do to make that happen, that you will not compromise in the doing, means that you won before you showed up. And that's something that people just do not understand about the outputs and the outcomes that you want in life. You were earning them every day. So when we talked earlier on about, well, you hurt your hand, that's unfortunate, and then you're like, oh, I went back 5 days later. I was like, well, what happened the other 5 days? That's what happened.
Excuses.
Nothing happened.
No, should have thrown on the weighted vest and hopped on the Stairmaster.
Yeah, right? Like, you would have had an opportunity to show yourself that, whatever it is that was getting in your way, that it didn't get in the way, and that what matters to you always matters to you no matter what's happening around you or to you. And that is how people outperform, truly outperform. Not just perform, outperform. That's how you go from 10% to 1%.
And
right?
It's conversations like this, and that I hope that people who hear snippets of this conversation, and I hope we're gonna get on the mic a lot more. This is already lighting a fire in me. I'm fucking embarrassed. I'm embarrassed that I today was my first day back since last week.
I think what's interesting around putting yourself and exposing yourself to high performers is realizing what's possible.
Yeah.
Versus like, oh.
Well, that goes hand in hand with surround yourself with you are the sum of the 5 people you hang with most.
I look at it as different circles. We have different circles within life. We have our party friend circle. We have our work circle. We have our family circle. And then we have another existential circle, which is like your inner 5. The people that you will do anything for. I don't even have 5. I think I have 3, maybe 4 of my kids, and their mother and, the woman in my life, for example. And then the kids. That's it. That is my inner 4 for which there are no boundaries. There is no limitation. There is no price too big to pay. Then there's top 10, top 50, whatever. And I've found that in life, realistically, we are really paradigmed around who are we really willing to do something for and with what level of limitation or not. And that really speaks to like how much we really value something and them and what they mean to our core existence and experience of life and in some way our humanity. Like for me, it's my mother, my 2 kids, their mother, and people are always surprised about how high I index on the mother of my children, who's for a very long time now no longer my partner in life and with whom I don't have an intimate relationship. She is the mother of my children. I chose to have children with her because I believe that if I died the next day, there was nobody else that I would want to be the mother of my children. So when I hear guys who are like, well, I mean, what about with all the money you've given her and we were never married? And I've chosen to give her, a fair amount of my wealth, and I've always committed to that, and it was always a part of the process for me because I've created what I have because she was my person. And the things that are most important to me in my life, which are my children, are entirely because she agreed to create a life with me that she never thought in her own life as the life that she would want or that she was trying to create. So she had to alter her perspective and vision and dreams of life to engage and enter into a completely different opportunity of life, right? Like not being married, right? Not having a picket fence, right? She came from a traditional Brooklyn immigrant family, she's Chinese. I mean, there's all these kind of cultural and traditional dynamics that play, and suddenly I'm like, oh yeah, I'm an entrepreneur in video games, and I'm not even that close to my family, and we're gonna be taking all these risks all the time, and we're gonna move to San Francisco, we're gonna move back to New York, we're gonna move back to San Francisco, we're gonna move back to New York, and
and also think about like you saying to her family that you're when you were in gaming, it was not nearly what it is now.
No. I mean, they were like, that's not a job.
Yeah.
You're an entrepreneur. That doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Your father's rich. Why aren't you working with him? There's something wrong with you. I actually gave my kids their mother's last name, including mine, because I don't have really a cultural legacy in my family, and as being French and partially German, it just never mattered to how we were raised. But Chinese culture and the red envelopes and Chinese New Year's and the family dynamic is real to her, and I actually find it fantastic. I think it's really, really valuable in so many ways. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to call them Chan Kriegel. I'm going to put your first name first and my second. Her parents were like, he's not even taking ownership of the children. And I was like, I can't win. But to me, it was like, oh, they value this, and I care about the kids having that, and mine doesn't mean that much to me, so why wouldn't I do that? And so, for me and Kim, like, her happiness is everything to me, because it means my kids' happiness. It means our households. It means that indexing of kids and family. What does it take? Anything is what it takes. And so even though we've been separated for a long time, we live across the hall from each other. We go on vacations together. We've co-parented, cohabitated, right? We have to have trust with each other's money. She has the keys to my apartment. We have rules around our personal lives. But I created a fundamental environment, which was 60% of my life is committed to the kids and the family, in how I index in my value system, so which is where I put my time, my energy, my money, my emotions. And 40% is everything else, my personal life, my achievements, my goals, my startups, whatever else, right? And so I got to find a way to have a level of efficiency and productivity in that 40%. Speed climbing. Like, it wasn't like, oh, I have an ego and I'm going to go challenge Nimzai and Colin Brady. No, it was like, okay, I can do this over 5 years, and it's going to be a friction point every time I want to get away for 2, 3, or 4 weeks to climb these mountains, like every other Joe Schmo out there who's committed to that. And by the way, the average 7 Summit challenge is like 10 years at least to accomplish. So when you try to do and then I was like, so what would it take to do it in like 5 years, 3 years, 2 years? Like, suddenly I was like, okay. And then it was like there's an excitement behind the opportunity of doing it completely differently, and have to train and apply myself and learn and discover at way higher velocity than anybody else would who's just doing one every 1 to 2 years. Right? I was like, okay, well, now I'm going to do 50 highest points, 7 summits, North and South Pole in a year and a half. But the original was 5 years, which even that was 2-3 times faster than anybody else was doing it. Colin had done it in 1 year, which requires everything to come in together, right? Because you're talking about seasonalities and planes and summiting and coming back down and catching your flights, and you have very short windows for all these different mountains. The seasons are very short because of weather conditions when you're in Everest or Denali, so everything has to come together. No injury, right? So it takes like a perfect circumstance. So I ended up starting that in 2021. By 2022, there was a war in Ukraine, which means Russia, and then North Pole is partially managed by Russia. So now the North Pole was shut down. There were issues in issues in Indonesia, political as well as local. So now that mountain got shut down. Then Elbrus, which is in Russia, which was defined as the highest peak in Europe, that mountain was shut down. So now I'm like I was moving at a velocity that was completely aligned with actually achieving a year and a half, 50 highest points, 7 summits, North South Pole, the Grand Slam. And now there's 3 mountains that are taken off the map, right? And you're like, Jesus,
can't win.
No, you have to accept what is it that you're doing now? Well, I ended up climbing 139 mountains in 2.5 years anyway.
It's amazing.
And I only had 4 failed attempts. That's it. So and they were all speed climbs, solo or solo guided. And so to put myself in the physical condition, in the mindset, and the constraint, if I got off a plane, I would climb a summit, get down the same day, like Aconcagua. I climbed 5-day round trips. It's usually 2 to 3 weeks. It's 23,000 feet. So it's a significant, challenge and undertaking to go at elevation, no oxygen. And I spent 7 months living in a hypoxico tent which is an oxygen-deprived environment that you sleep in, that reduces the oxygen input so that your body acclimatizes faster to having lower oxygen density, so that you replicate what it's like being at higher elevation.
How much does a tent like that cost?
Depending on the engine, because some of them are smaller engines that does get lower altitude. So like I think there's one that's like $2,500 for up to 10,000 feet of kind of oxygen deprivation environment, and the other one is 5,000 to go up to 21,000.
Less than I expected.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, no brainer.
Yeah.
Right. So then next thing you know, I'm 7 months straight
I
sleeping in that.
thought you were going to say like 10x that.
No, but now you have a tent in your apartment. You have a bed in your tent, right? And you have an engine that goes all night long, right? And you put it on every night, and you got to commit to that, and you got to increase the elevation so that your body gets shocked every day. You go from 0 to 10,000 elevation, 0 to 10,000, 0 to 10,000. There was a huge price to pay for that, right? That was a full years of commitment. I never missed training, never missed taking the kids to school. If I get off a mountain, within that same 12-hour window, I'm back taking the kids to school. We had a rule with Cam, the mother of my children. If you're not taking care of the kids, you're on vacation. I don't care if you're working. That doesn't matter. You're not with the kids, so you're on vacation. When you take things in that context, because you're not taking the responsibility, right? So then you're getting a break. So if I went to climb, Denali for 4 days, I came back and she's like, oh, it doesn't matter if I just literally nearly died and had frostbite or whatever else, which all these things have, obviously come close to happening. And I had frostbites and everything else. I take the kids that same morning off of the red eye to school, and I have them that night. And I will have them the next 4 or 5 days. Because I have to make up for the time I took off.
Absolutely.
And then I have my own days.
Absolutely.
And so it's trust and self-worth and self-respect comes from your ability to be committed to that. It doesn't require somebody else. It requires you valuing what it is you value so much that there is just nothing you're not willing to do for that, right? And then there's something that's just not as important. But once you are completely hyper-indexing on what truly brings you joy, what truly makes you happy, what truly gives you fulfillment, what truly feeds your engine of life on a human standpoint. It ain't going to be money, even though it's important. And you might as well have some. Why wouldn't you over-index on that? And then you make everything else work around that. Because everything else can work around that. It's just going to take that much more work. And you're going to have to own that work so much more than anybody else does. Because some other guy who's using the nannies, who has the babysitters on the weekend, who's got a big apartment, who's going to find reasons, who's offsetting, offshoring, outsourcing, making excuses, he's got it easier than you. He may be on an uneventful treadmill working at Goldman Sachs, making his $10 million a year with his 2 houses, whatever else. Your life is going to be harder. No doubt. It's going to be harder the person who chooses to do nothing with theirs, and it's going to be harder than the person who chooses to be on a $10 million treadmill. Because you're making that level of commitment to the people around you, to which the reason why for 25 years that Cam and I have known each other, she is still on my will. She gets to pull the plug. I still give her money on a yearly basis, personal wealth. She's a multimillionaire. She's still working her job. It's because she trusts me beyond anybody else, because I have never broken the rules. And that's the true discipline. The rules evolve. The environment has to evolve. The empathy around accepting where we all are has to grow, and you have to be a driver of that, because other people don't know how to do that. They only know how to complain or get angry or get resentful. So you not only have to maintain it, you have to allow it to evolve. That takes a lot of work.
Amen.
So the greatest thing that I get to do with Cam, for example, who's now in a serious relationship, is to support her relationship. And my guy friends are like, how do you trust the other person? I'm like, I trust her.
Yeah.
Because we spent 20 plus years trusting each other. Like, what about that money? I trust her. If your wife is only good enough to you to be trusted when she's your wife, I'm not really sure what that says about her, you, or the relationship. Right? If she's only worth your money on the downside, I'm not really sure that I understand what that means about your relationship or what that's worth to you. Like, she's worth everything to me. So I will do whatever it takes for her to find herself and her process and her growth and her happiness and her joy, and I view that as a huge part of my responsibility beyond just my life. Because if she's there and she continues to evolve around that, then my kids will always be better off. And then my inner circle of those 5 which is my sanctuary, will always be protected and safer. And they, as kids, will grow up better humans, happier humans, more joyful humans, and more stable humans, which is, to me, the least that one should be doing for their children. Like, paying for an education, yeah, great. My father did that for us. And on the other side of that, he was incapable of being a father, right? So, like, what is it that we're bartering? Like, yeah, if I can give everything else to my children versus a $20,000 or $50,000 or $100,000 a year education, I think they'll be okay. But if all you have is a $100,000 education and you don't have integrity, you don't have identity, you don't have self-worth, you don't have emotional stability, you don't have great resilience, I'm sorry. You're not going to be a better person or better off.
No.
You're just not.
Woo! Wilson Kriegel. Nothing but gems. Nothing but gems.